All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first sustainability chat of the year 2022. My name is Casey Meehan. I am the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at Western Technical College. And in that role, I also serve as to help with the programming with the Sustainability Institute, which is a 501c3 organization that's located in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and housed at Western Technical College. Our mission at the Sustainability Institute is to celebrate sustainability efforts in our area. And really, we want to promote a positive vision of what sustainable future looks like in our region, in the driftless area of the US. So a few reminders before we get started. First of all, please keep your microphones muted. We'll be monitoring the chat box. So if you've got questions or concerns, please put those in the chat box. And to access that chat box, just click on the little conversation bubble icon that's located in the toolbar of the Zoom screen. So we want to start, this is a session on developing a climate action plan here in La Crosse. And we want to start with just a really quick poll to sort of get a sense of where you all are at with this climate action plan in La Crosse, so we can better understand your perspective and guide our speaker a little bit today. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen right about now. If you could just take a few seconds to answer those two questions. All right, it looks like most people have answered. So the majority of people, it looks like, have heard about the climate action plan in La Crosse, about 60% of you. And most of you have not participated in any other sessions or the survey for the climate action plan. So great, you are in the right place to learn a little bit more about how to do that. So at the Sustainability Institute, our work is really guided by the United Nations Global Goals, which is a plan that's really used to address some of the world's most pressing problems right now. So abject poverty, systemic inequalities, and of course, climate change. And really, these goals work in conjunction with each other to really try to solve those problems synergistically. And one of those goals, you'll notice, is focused specifically on climate action. Now, as you're aware, every spot on Earth right now, including here in the driftless, is being impacted by climate change. And climate change, as we know, is a result primarily of our burning fossil fuels. So oftentimes, when we talk of climate change, and the future, particularly with climate change, we tend to slip into this gloom and doom scenario, right? And they're oftentimes amplified by popular media, but they really color how we move forward with responding to climate change. And they do so by sort of promoting this idea of fear, right? I mean, this is from I Am Legend, right? When we think about movies, popular apocalyptic movies, we got fear, a sense of denial, a sense of scarcity. And now, make no mistake, the climate crisis is a really urgent issue. And we need significant and immediate action if we are to avoid some of the worst case scenarios that are out there. But I think it's also important to remember that the future is not written yet. And that an equally reasonable future story for us can be based on abundance and renewal and justice and ways of doing things that leave the world and our communities better off. And the thing is, we actually have the solutions right now to get us to that better world, that more thriving world. I want to draw your attention to two organizations in particular, Project Drawdown and Regeneration. These are both organizations that are leading the way in terms of helping us understand the solutions that are already available and how they might help us mitigate and adapt to climate change in a way that actually brings about this abundance and this thriving for everybody. Now, the thing is that Drawdown and Regeneration tell us what we can do, but they don't really tell us how we get there, right? How do we do those things? And for that, we need a plan. So a few years ago, La Crosse committed, along with over 10,000 cities and local governments around the world, to take really ambitious climate action and pledge to be carbon neutral by 2050. The city has since formed a steering committee to work with an expert on developing the city's first ever climate action plan. And today we are talking with Ted Redmond, who is the co-founder of paleBluedot. And he's charged with helping the city of La Crosse create that first ever plan. So it's really exciting work. paleBluedot has helped over 40 municipalities from across the country develop climate action plans. And a large part of that plan that Ted and his group is helping us create, how we move forward to address this climate problem. It's aided by the insights of all of us, right, of community members here in La Crosse. So I want to turn it over to Ted Redmond right now, who is going to tell us a bit about how this plan is being formulated and how all of you can contribute to making it the best plan possible for us. So Ted, with that, take it away.
Great, thanks, Casey. And I am, maybe if I can share my screen, that would be awesome. I can get up my, there we go. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. And thank you for taking some time this afternoon to connect on the Climate Action Plan. Casey did a fantastic intro to it. For my part, I was just going to touch a little bit of an introduction so you know who I am, but Casey actually already did that, so that'll be fast. I wanted to then just kind of touch on climate change in La Crosse, kind of what we've experienced, what might we anticipate experiencing, talk a little bit about what this project is, the point of the project, kind of how they go together, so to speak. Take a little bit of time to just touch on the kinds of solutions that can go into a climate action plan, just a very high level sort of review. Then I wanted to share with you the planning process that we're going through, including community engagement opportunities and ways that you all can get involved in the process and help us generate ideas and review ideas. And then of course, Q&A. So just touching on introductions very briefly. Again, I'm Ted Redmond. I'm one of the partners with paleBluedot. Our focus is to hasten the transition to a carbon-free economy and to elevate the public discourse. As a consultancy, we focus entirely on sustainability, climate, and renewable energy planning. As Casey's indicated, we've done projects, relevant projects for 50 plus municipalities, not in every state, but kind of dabbled around the country. The bulk of our work is in the Midwest, from Indiana through Minnesota, but we have worked outside of that zone as well. So kind of getting into a little bit in terms of climate change in La Crosse, this little beautiful image here, these are called climate stripes. And so each one of these stripes is the average temperature for every year in Wisconsin since 1895 through 2020. If it's a blue stripe, it means it's colder than average. If it's a red stripe, it means it's warmer than average. And I love these graphics. They're put together by a group just called Climate Stripes because they're very visually succinct and simple to understand. We can see the sort of red shift happening. It just sort of helps us understand that we have actually been seeing and experiencing climate change. And I'm sorry, this graphic says Hennepin County. That annoys me that I did not correct that. I'm sorry about that. The numbers are actually correct though. As we look at storm, severe weather events as reported by NOAA for La Crosse County, I'm sorry about that, that's horrible. But between 2001 and 2011, La Crosse County had 201 events. Between 2011 and 2021, we had 275 events, which represents an increase of 37% over that 20-year time frame. And an average annual cost of $5.86 million annually. And we've had a couple of deaths, unfortunately, related to extreme weather in that time frame as well. As we look forward into the future with climate change, we can expect our temperatures to increase. This chart here shows the projections for La Crosse County. Basically, what you are seeing is the solid lines. There's a red line and a blue line. The red line shows what the projected average annual temperatures for La Crosse County are expected to be between now and 2100, under the scenario of business as usual, meaning that things continue kind of the way they are. The solid blue line is with a projected average temperatures through 2100 if we were to succeed at meeting the Paris Accord. And then the cone of color shows you the swath of potential. So those solid lines are the average, but really the important thing about climate change is it's not so much that we're going to be warming up 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 degrees. It's that our variability is increasing. So given 1 year to the next, temperatures from one season to the next, temperatures from 1 week to the next, the variability will be increasing with time. And that's what those cones start to show us. That potential gets bigger. This projection shows days above 95. So right now in La Crosse, we just have a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe in a given year. As we project into the future, through the end of this century, we can have as many as 50 on average days above 95. Now, those are important days because at 95, of course, the human body stops cooling off. You cannot cool off by ambient temperature. 95-degree days are often followed by warm nights, and vulnerable populations become even more so vulnerable under such high temperature days. So those are days that we really are concerned about health concerns and potential death. So one thing that I like to think about in terms of climate change is equate it to moving our communities. It helps, it's a sort of a visceral sort of imagination of what climate future might look like. These projections here show kind of temperature projections, projected precipitation, et cetera. But really, it's kind of like picking up the entire state of Wisconsin and moving it south, such that towards the end of the century, summers in La Crosse will be a lot like southern Arkansas or northern Texas. So it's kind of like picking up the city and moving it south 12 miles every year, or almost half of a city block every single day over the next coming decades. So of course, climate change is going to affect all of us. We all live in this climate. We all live on this planet. The ecosystems are here with us. Everything gets affected. However, when it comes to climate planning, what we need to do is focus on vulnerable populations. The reason being that those amongst us that are more vulnerable to climate change, if we can reduce their vulnerability, we have basically reduced all of our vulnerabilities. So the primary climate risks here are listed at the top. The biggies for La Crosse are flooding, extreme temperature, extreme weather events, air quality, power failure, and food insecurity would be the top ones that I would tend to flag. There's also related economic risks that we have coming our way through climate change, including increased energy costs, agricultural costs and concerns, property crime, violent crime, et cetera. And the community groups that we typically flag as most vulnerable are children, older adults, seniors over 65, individuals with disabilities, those that are in economic stress, people of color, at-risk workers, think first responders, contractors, folks that work out in the elements, food insecure individuals, and folks that don't have good access to mobility. So related to climate change projections, of course, is our contributions to climate change. All of us are contributing to climate change here through man-made emissions generation. So just kind of taking a snapshot at La Crosse's annual greenhouse gas emissions. In 2020, we did drop from 2019. 2019 was 775,000 metric tons. 2020 was less by 100 and almost 110 tons, 110,000 tons at 667,000 tons. Now, we can anticipate that, of course, we had the pandemic, that there's probably a lot going on in those numbers related to the pandemic. We did see a downtick in VMT pretty significantly for that year. So there's probably, we're riding the skirts of the pandemic to a degree, but there has been, I think, a downward trend for La Crosse, which is great. This cube here, I like to visualize greenhouse gas because, what's a metric ton of greenhouse gas? We don't really experience that in our day-to-day life. So that amount of emissions is equal to a cube that's takes up a volume of almost 14 billion cubic feet of atmosphere that's man-made, that's going to be emitted and out into the atmosphere, functioning as a greenhouse gas for 100 years or plus. So it's roughly a cube that's about a half a mile in each direction. And this is that volume sitting right on top of downtown La Crosse that we're seeing from a couple, 2-3 miles away. Now, comparing our emissions in La Crosse to other communities, the way we do comparisons is we just identify it as a emissions per capita. That way, smaller cities and bigger cities, we can kind of equate a little bit. If it's got a green arrow, that it means that their emissions are below ours. If it's got a red arrow, it means that their emissions are above ours on a per capita basis. And just kind of looking at the Midwest and Eastern states and kind of pulling out a number of those communities, you see La Crosse down along the bottom there, kind of right in the center. So our per capita emissions are a little over or almost about 15 tons per person. And we're kind of right in the middle of the pack. So that means, we've got a good place to start from in terms of reducing. We've made what we call a business as usual forecast or projection of where our emissions might go in the coming decades. That's what this chart here shows. The little graph on the left side there shows projected emissions. The fantastic news is that our electrical emissions should Xcel Energy meet their commitments and their current pace, which they have been doing a pretty good job at this last decade or so in reducing their emissions. If they meet their commitments by 2050, our electricity will be carbon neutral. So that is good news. We can anticipate, however, some uptick in our natural gas consumption, in part due to the larger varying of weather. We can actually oddly anticipate some colder days as we move forward. Even though we have overall annual temperatures increasing, we're going to have some colder days. Think of those polar snaps that we've been experiencing here. And our vehicle miles are likely to increase. However, we will hopefully be seeing electrification of some of our vehicles, and so our emissions per mile will hopefully drop. So overall, in the next couple of decades, if we don't do anything, we anticipate that our emissions will drop. Unfortunately, not fast enough. So this blue line shows you where the city's goal is currently, which is to get to carbon neutral by 2050. By the way, that goal also lines up with the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. It's the UN panel that helps advise policy and direction based on science. Their recommendations are to achieve carbon neutral by 2050 and about a 50% reduction by 2030 over 2018 numbers, by the way. And that's what that chart sort of shows, that line shows. So even though we're anticipating reductions, it's not enough. So it does help us understand that we need to do some planning to decrease our emissions faster. So that's the project, is to create a climate action plan for La Crosse. It's intended to guide the city for both municipal operations as well as citywide, community-wide addressing climate issues. The plan will establish overall climate goals as well as strategies and actions to meet those goals. The climate action plan, you say, well, what is a climate action plan? Well, it's a comprehensive roadmap that outlines specific strategies and actions that a city or an organization can implement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to climate change. Climate action plans typically include inventorying our existing emissions, identification of reduction goals and targets, analyzing and prioritizing reduction actions, and then assembling them into basically it's a laundry list of to-dos. This is what we're going to be doing now moving forward. And so the La Crosse CAP is anticipated to address both mitigation as well as adaptation. So mitigation is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, so reducing how we are contributing to climate change, which is going to help us reduce what we have to adapt to in the future. And adaptation is saying, look, we already are experiencing climate change. Even when we're successful in reducing our emissions over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we are going to see increasing impacts from climate change. So that isn't to say that we shouldn't be mitigating and reducing our emissions. It's just that we also have to recognize we've got changes coming and we should prepare for them. So that's what adaptation does. So as a broad roadmap plan, climate action plans look at broadly at all of the aspects of our communities. So we look at things like buildings and energy, transportation and land use and housing, solid waste and recycling, which, by the way, those sectors at the top, those top three, are the sectors that are largely mitigation. So they have the largest potential for greenhouse gas reduction. They also have mitigation aspects, or excuse me, adaptation aspects, where we can adapt to the impacts of climate change. The sectors on the bottom there, though, water and wastewater, flooding, health and safety, food and agriculture, green space, tree canopy, and economy, all of those sectors have strong adaptation focus. And of course, there are opportunities for us to reduce emissions as well in those sectors, but those sectors are largely focused at adaptation. So as I mentioned, that CAPs have strategies and actions. So strategy are specific statements of direction. They kind of help us to provide a sense of where do we want to go so that we can guide policy and decisions moving forward. An example of a strategy statement is reduce community-wide energy consumption by 10% for electricity and natural gas by 2030. So that's just an example from other climate action plans. I'm sure we'll have something similar. And you can see that that gives us a sense of where we want to go, something that needs to be accomplished, but it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of telling you how. Well, how do we do that? And so that's what action statements are for. They're detailed steps that can be taken and implemented to achieve those goals. An example is establish a large business energy efficiency program to promote building improvements and practices that reduce energy use. Target 10 large businesses commissioned annually. So that's an example of the kind of thing that might come out of actions. So we're going to have some strategies, and then we're going to have a list of a number of detailed actions that have that kind of specificity to say exactly what we want to do. Now, one thing I do like to point out in a public session like this, that for climate action plan, so as a city creates one and then adopts it and brings it into their policy, I'd like to just note that so a plan will probably have some comments about, establish a policy to do this or review ordinances to do that. And I just like to point out that wherever a climate action plan does have an action like that, the ordinance doesn't just become automatically law in the community. It will still have to go through the normal process. So if there's anything in the climate action plan that says explore a policy, that policy will still go through the sort of normal process of getting in front of the city council or commissions and public review. So just so you understand that part. So what kinds of actions can be included? There's a ton of them. I like to think of them in groups. The first group is examples, leading by examples. The city has buildings, the city has properties. So we can do things like, hey, let's put solar on this building and then illustrate how it performs and share that information with the public, or help people see how certain things can be done. So the city can do a lot to just provide example. The city can incentivize. So now incentives can mean literally like a cash incentive. Hey, do A, B, and C, and we're going to give you X% off of your tax or building permit or whatever. I mean, there are things like that that cities can do and have done. Incentives can also just be, what can we do to make things easier for people? What can we do if I have to submit for a building permit? If I do A, B, and C, maybe I go to the front of the line, or the review process is faster. I mean, things like that can help incentivize. We also can do advocacy. And so advocating can be literal advocacy, like, hey, we're going to join up with other communities like Eau Claire and Madison. We're going to go to the state legislature or the federal lawmakers, and we're going to advocate for support or needs. It can also be advocating through education to the public. So letting people understand this choice versus that choice, or get information that is difficult for people to get to right now about how to make a better choice. And also there's, of course, requirement. So there are opportunities for tweaking policies or ordinance and ways of exploring requirements. Now, and of course, requirements can be kind of hard, fast requirement, like thou shall do A, B, and C. But there's an awful lot of requirements that can be sort of I think of a soft sort of requirement. For instance, one example is, hey, you're submitting for your building permit. In addition to your typical submission, we also want you to submit a solar feasibility assessment that shows that you have looked at what solar PV could be on your new building and have looked at the paybacks for it. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to put the solar on your building. We just want you to do the feasibility assessment. Here's a couple solar installers that will do it for free. So that kind of lower level requirement can help to feed back into that advocacy or education. So those are just examples, but the kinds of things that can come about. Ultimately, we're going to be producing a number of things. The first is, of course, the Climate Action Plan itself. Now, these are, of course, not for La Crosse. This is just a past project that I'm sharing with you. But the plan itself is like a municipal document, planning document. It'll have information, histories, and explain a little bit why certain things are in there. And then it's going to provide the detail of what are we trying to do and why. In addition to that, we also produce an implementation tool that we call the implementation matrix. This is a live document. It's an Excel-based tool. It's searchable and provides a tool for municipal staff who are responsible for implementing these actions to track what they're doing. And the reason why I like to highlight this is that a climate action plan should be considered a living document. This is not a one and done kind of a thing. So we're not going to do a plan and then it sits on a shelf, and you're not going to do a plan and have it not change. We're looking at a goal between now and 2050. You know, just think about what's changed in your life in the last 20, 30 years, probably a lot. So as we look forward into the next 20, 30 years, we need to understand that we are setting a course for a journey, and it will change as we go along. So a climate action plan should be updated and maintained. And so that's what the implementation matrix does. We also will provide a database of example policies or ordinances or programs that relate to some of the actions in the plan. And we do that just because we want to give the city planning staff and city staff as much of a boost as we can. So if there is something in there about exploring a policy or a program, if we have examples, we like to share them. That way, as we start to explore it as a city, we can go look at what other cities have done and learn from that. If you're interested in seeing examples of climate action plans, you can go to our website and feel free to email me. I can get you a link for that as well. So why should we be doing CAPs? Why are they needed? Well, threats posed by climate change represent significant community level hazards. The changes needed are systemic. Making changes across so many sectors does require coordination among multiple players, if you will. And effective climate action requires prioritization of resources and focus. As anything, there's all sorts of things that we're going to want to do, but we all will have limited time or resources. So we want to make sure that we apply our efforts as effectively as possible. Also, doing a climate action plan provides a lot of community co-benefits, as we call them. So things will change regardless. Of course, in the next 20, 30 years, we can definitely expect 2050 is going to look different from 2020 in La Crosse. And we can either get in front of those changes and participate in them as an active participant, or we can be dragged by them. And of course, planning for them and participating, getting out in front of it helps us do lots of things like help create jobs or economic development. If we're going to switch energy systems and get more and more renewable energy or electrification of mobility or other mobility options, if we get in front of those things, we can find ways of creating jobs for ourselves, not just to serve our community, but also serve the region around us or beyond even. So job creation, improved public health and improved air quality, cost savings for residents and businesses. If we save 10% of our energy, we're going to save 10% of our energy costs, right? So just kind of mapping that out, we will kind of calculate this at just a high level, trying to help illustrate that. There are numbers of a series of savings, cumulative wide community costs. This is for actually a community of similar size actually to La Crosse. But things like energy efficiency and renewable energy, those can save money operationally. Electric vehicles, oh, I'm sorry, these are the costs. We need to invest in these things. Energy efficiency will have some cost. Electric vehicles, right now, they do cost more than an ICE vehicle, although that will be changing in the coming decades, probably, we anticipate. Public transit, we may have investments in buying tickets for public transit, et cetera. But there's also savings. So those same investments that we make in energy efficiency or renewable energy will save us money year by year into the future for decades. EVs, if I buy an EV, it's got lower annual operating costs. Mobility, if I switch from driving a car by myself and go to carpooling or walking or public transit, I'll have dollar savings for every mile that I move myself. So we can add those things up to illustrate both the costs and the savings. And in addition to this, there's also avoided costs of carbon, which is called the social cost of carbon. Those are not illustrated in those examples to the left, but on the right, you'll see that this community from which I pulled this, we did illustrate the social cost of carbon as well. So we can kind of project sort of, there's real world savings in here. So the kinds of solutions that come about, so in buildings and energy, really we're looking to stop fossil fuels in heating and cooling our buildings. So renewable energy. We also want to reduce how much energy we're consuming. Even if we're using renewable energy, the less energy we need, the less renewable energy we're going to need, which means we're going to save on investing on renewable energy. We're going to save on the embodied carbon footprint of those components, save on materials, et cetera. Things like energy efficiency appliances, also the things that we plug into our walls that pull electricity. In the city of La Crosse, buildings and energy is roughly 61% of our total carbon footprint, so it's an important sector. For transportation, we're looking at, really, we want to stop using fossil fuels for moving ourselves around. So electric vehicles, certainly public transit, even if it's a diesel bus, we've got many of us riding on one diesel bus versus many of us driving fossil fuel vehicles. So that is a significant savings. And of course, we can electrify our public transit. We also want to look at fuel switching. So there are some vehicles that maybe they're diesel today and they're going to be diesel 10 years from now because electric maybe isn't quite there for it. It will be eventually, but maybe not in short order. So looking at things like, can we replace it with hydrogen, or can we replace it with biodiesel that comes from a organic source instead of fossil fuel source? And of course, fuel efficiency. Solid waste, we want to look at waste reduction. We want to look at recycling, and we absolutely want to look at compost. In our solid waste sector, our largest emission component is having organics go to landfills and create methane. So collecting organics and doing something with those organics, like composting, or even plasma gasification, where it turns it into a hydrogen, basically creating beneficial use one way or the other. Let's turn our organics into soil or into fuel, but let's not just have it rot and emit into the air. Water and wastewater. It takes energy to clean and prepare and distribute our water, and of course to treat our wastewater. So everything we can do to reduce our consumption is greenhouse gas emission avoided. Of course, it has other advantages related to climate change, like overall water aquifers and saving our water, because our water is going to become a scarcer and scarcer commodity moving into the future for all of us. We sit in a pretty good area here in Minnesota and Wisconsin where we've got a lot of water, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to treat it as the crucial resource that it is. And then lastly, we also look at economy, climate economy, as I talk about, and that sort of circles back to that co-benefit of job creation and economic development. Some of these changes, if we get in front of them, can mean opportunities for businesses, opportunities for jobs, opportunities for training and education, and improved quality of life. So typically we like looking at that just to start the ball rolling on what can we do to capture those opportunities for the community. So just a little observation on successful climate action plans. We find that they're usually grounded in science. They leverage wisdom from lots of folks. They get community recognition of needs, and they transition into action. That has organized our approach for our planning effort. We start off with a lot of existing documentation. So these are all from another example community. We're actually issuing La Crosse's documents here in the next week. So you can keep your eyes out for that. But we're doing a vulnerability assessment that's understand the vulnerabilities related to climate. We do a greenhouse gas inventory. We do a ground cover, tree canopy, and carbon sequestration study so that we can look at things like heat island and tree canopy cover, et cetera. And we do then a climate action baseline assessment. So the importance of that is that it also takes literally hundreds of pages worth of research that we are doing that's community specific, and we're turning it into a document that's more succinct. And for each of those sectors that I talked about, it's anywhere from 2 to maybe 8 pages that has some background history, background content, a little bit of analysis, and some high-level recommendations on where can we go from here to meet our goals. If you're interested in seeing examples of that, you can see them on our website, but more importantly, you'll be able to see the La Crosse ones here before too long. Our process is we are working with a collaborative team. It's a team of, we have over 50 individuals, which is fantastic. It's the largest team that we've ever worked with. La Crosse has lots of folks that are really excited to participate. So this team is going to be deeply involved, and we will literally co-author and co-create the plan together. We're going to do that through a series of workshops. We have just done our second one, which was focusing on goal setting for vulnerability. And then we're going to start our goal setting broadly on our next meeting. And then we're going to go through a series of in-depth workshops where the team members are actually going to explore best practices and potential actions and create potential actions, and then together refine them and prioritize what actions we want in order to meet those goals. And along the way, we'll be doing things like modeling greenhouse gas emissions reductions, giving best practice insight, and helping to pull in other pieces of information that teammates may not see. We also are doing community engagement. So we have community engagement in 2 phases. We are in phase 1, which is pre-planning. So it started in the fall and it's going through about April. So we're doing community engagement meetings, discussions like this, online survey. We're doing equity listening sessions where we're doing specific outreach and engagement to groups focusing on equity considerations so that we make sure that we hear from folks that are under-resourced and that typically cities have a hard time making sure we hear from. So we want to focus on that as much as we can. We also have an opportunity for collecting perspectives through art and public information campaign. We've provided information on flyers, social media, and a website for the community. We're going to do that same kind of process again after we have our draft, which is going to be out in the summer and fall. So we're going to go do a round. we're doing a round now to let people know what we're doing and to get input. And we're going to be doing a second round once we have a draft plan so we can get input on that draft plan itself. So we've created a web page for the city of La Crosse. This will be hopefully a permanent web page. It'll certainly go into implementation. Right now, it's a place to learn about the climate action plan process. In the future, it will be a place to go to learn about the implementation of the plan and how are things going. There are currently ongoing engagement opportunities right now that we want people to know about and help engage. The first is climate action survey. It's a survey that, depending on how if you're very slow and methodical like me, maybe it might take you 10, 12 minutes, maybe something like that. If you're a much faster thinker than I am, you probably can do it in about 6 or 7 minutes. But we really want as many people as possible to take that survey to help us gain a better understanding and some ideas from the community. The other opportunity that's going on right now is what we call the Climate Stories Project. And so the survey is kind of, I think of it as like the left brain. It's very orderly. There's specific questions, please answer them. The Climate Stories Project is very right brain. It's very open-ended. Opportunities to submit stories. Maybe it's a vision of the future. What does a climate resilient La Crosse look like to you? It could be artwork, it could be photos, it could be music. We're just trying to make it as open-ended as possible. So people can submit in writing, they can do video, they can do a video recording right there on their computer through a widget. They can upload files. So we're trying to make it as open-ended as we can. And we just want people to be heard and to share their input with us in as many different ways as possible. And of course, we're doing events, pop-up meetings, presentations, and others. And we've got those listed, and that will continue to evolve as we move forward. So you can kind of track there. We also will have what we call a meeting in a box. And so that's an opportunity for folks to host their own listening session. So if you have a group of neighbors, a group of coworkers, or an association that you're a member of that you'd like to do a listening session, you can do your own. And it should be out next week. It'll be it'll have some infographics. It'll also have some talking points and then specific questions that we're hoping to collect input from and a place to provide that input. So, and if you're interested and able to help get the word out, that social media kit that I talked about is available. You can go in there. There's example emails, there's example newsletter items, there's links to the survey and the climate stories, Facebook post examples, etc. So just to sort of underscore again, there's 2 ways you can get involved right now, and we really would love it if everybody here and everybody if you can help us get everybody to take the climate action survey, that would be fantastic. You can find it on the La Crosse Climate Action Plan website. It's a button that just says survey. That's the link for it. And if you have any interest in sharing a climate story, we would love to get it. Again, it can be a writing, it can be a video, recording, artwork of any sort, and that's the link for there. You can also just easily find it just by going to the Climate Action Plan website. So that's what I have for my presentation.
Ted, thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions here. First of all, just to sort of transition, why does getting a wide range of community input on this plan, why does that matter?
It is extremely important because it is, as a community plan, I'm sorry, my computer just did something funky, so I was getting like blurry thing. So it's a community-wide plan, so that means we want to make sure that the community knows about the process and can contribute to it. But B, and frankly, even more importantly, the city will not be able to do this by themselves. The lead staff person at the city will not be able to do this by themselves. The entire city staff cannot do this by themselves. We're talking about changes that we all need to participate in and can benefit from participating in. So making sure that we get as many people involved in it today is very important. And we also want to then try to set that up so that there's more involvement moving forward so that we can do this as a community. And of course, climate action, like many things in our world, can affect people differently. Climate impacts affect different people differently. Different vulnerabilities have different impacts related to that. The solutions that we come up with can have unintended consequences on people that we maybe don't want to have unintended consequences on. And so trying to get as many different voices and views into it is very important to try to avoid that as well as we humanly can together. So.
This is a question from one of our participants. What options are there for communities who might be working on a climate action plan to control projects that are already in the pipeline? So, for example, old standards that they're operating under that make it harder to reach the climate goals when the cap is finished. So, like here in La Crosse, for example, housing developments that are already permitted, but that will, maybe not be very well insulated or will allow for natural gas fixtures. I guess, how do we work with those, standards already in place that a finished cap might actually change?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't know that there's a fantastic answer to it, because basically the way to help sort of address some of those concerns is, of course, through education, information, incentivization, or requirements, right? So that's how we get new housing developments to be better insulated, more climate stable, better renewable energy consumption, et cetera. We get them through educating, through advocating, through incentivizing, and through requiring in some mixture. And the mechanisms to do that, to do those things, the Climate Action Plan is the beginning of that process. And I can tell you that going from the plan to implementing it also, there is unfortunately, there's lag time, right? I mean, we can know, hey, we need to reduce our energy consumption. And then we can flag, hey, we should create a policy that does this. Here's opportunities to educate people. Here's resources that people can have. All those things take some time to actually then get up and going, right? So whenever you do a plan like this, there is always stuff that's already in the pipeline that feels too late to address. But rather than being a downer, I just like to recognize that whenever you do a plan like this, that is the case. And so by doing the plan today, we are getting in front of the ball of the projects that are tomorrow, right? It's harder for us to affect the projects from yesterday or the projects that are going concurrently. But frankly, that'll go back also to the first question. The more we can get the information out here that, hey, we are doing a climate action plan, please participate, please give us your feelings. Just getting that out there can help start to raise awareness that these things are important. So it's not as pleasing as being able to say, we're going to wave a wand and we're going to stop all projects for a year and a half. That might feel more pleasing, but this is the reality of how projects come about in the middle of a living, working, breathing, sophisticated city, right?
So here's a similar question that might breed a similarly unpleasing response. Have you had any experience with working in other communities having cap actions that are restricted by state legislation, possibly even after the cap has been put into place and now these new restrictions are passed?
Yes, yeah, that does happen, and that's a bummer. And often, we try to, of course, pre-anticipate that, and then there's opportunities for things that we didn't anticipate to come about. Or we've recently done one in Indiana, and then Indiana started changing their regulations and laws related to renewable energy, which now some of their actions are going to be harder to accomplish because of them. Part of the solution is to kind of the breadth of actions. It's important. It's very important that we focus on high impact opportunities. It's equally important, though, for us to understand that some high impact opportunities might be something that's going to take us 5 years to get done, or 6 years, or whatever, right? I mean, they're going to take some time. It doesn't say that we shouldn't do that and focus on it. But at the same time, also trying to be cognizant of what things can we get done tomorrow also. and not let them run into each other and, have to pick one over the other, try to move them both forward, walking and chewing gum at the same time kind of a thing. So a part of it is we try to make sure that our plans have some range of opportunities so that the ball can always be moving forward. Some of them are, to use the term aggressive, like this one's really trying to push the ball way down the court and it's going to be a big push. This one is going to be helpful and we can get that done tomorrow. Let's get them both going. So flexibility, I guess.
I've got just a couple more questions. Compared to cities around the Midwest and nationally, and that map that you showed of GHG per capita, that was a really fascinating map. Compared to cities around the Midwest and just nationally that you know of, what are some of La Crosse's strengths in terms of making a climate action plan successful? Like, have you seen in working with us that we can sort of strengths that we can play to?
Yeah, you've got awesome strengths. First of all, just looking at for instance, your emissions, just taking that as a profile, your residential emissions are really good. So that's already a successful area. Not that the others are not successful, but that's an illustration of that. I think, on a sort of a per household basis, you're doing pretty well. And tag team that with the fact that actually La Crosse's housing stock is older than I've seen in other communities. That means that we have a tag team opportunity that says, well, with an older housing stock, we probably have some homes that could use some updating and energy efficiency upgrades, which means there's greater opportunity to push that even further. So just in terms of the profile of what we have in the community, there is definitely some opportunities. The massive strength that you have, the people. I have never before in a climate action plan, we always do an announcement, try to get people involved in the planning team. Usually we have to pull teeth to get 3, 4, or 5 people to say, yeah, I'll be interested. La Crosse, it was amazing. We were buried with so many people that said, yeah, I'll participate in this big team that I have to work hard to be on. And it was amazing. And that just illustrates, this is scratching the surface. There's a ton of energy and activity in La Crosse of people that are focused on trying to advance these issues. And I would say pound for pound, probably more than any other community we've worked in, just looking at the size of the community versus the overall numbers of entities and people that are interested in working in this stuff. So it's pretty amazing. And of course, you've got great institutions, great educational institutions that are involved in this. You've got some big corporations that have some interest in these also. So I think there's a lot of energy opportunity, just collective energy that La Crosse, I think, will benefit from greatly. So I'm excited about it.
Great, so are we. And then finally, is there a comparable community that we can look at for inspiration? Who's been doing around the country or around the Midwest? What cities or municipalities have been doing some really cool, innovative work that we might take a look at?
I'd say nationally, there's a lot of communities that you can look at that do cool stuff. And some of them, you'll see really interesting strategies, like Watsonville, California has this really interesting, they call it a climate fund, where they're building all of their permit processes. All municipalities need revenue. All municipalities charge their community for certain services because that's how it's business, right? That's how things work. We need it to work that way so that our municipality can function. And so Watsonville looked at completely redesigning their permitting and other expenses so that it falls in line with their climate action plan. So that if you are doing certain things that are in target with the climate action plan, your costs drop. And if you're not, your costs go up. So it's a really innovative idea. I think pretty effective. It's been up and running for a few years now. Boulder does something similar, but theirs is focused on housing. So that's what one policy that really short circuits the idea of, well, we need developers and multifamily housing owners to advance this stuff. How do we do it when we don't have the laws in place? Boulder's gotten around that by saying, well, for licensing, there's certain issues that you have to follow through on. Others are encouragements. So they really are advancing it through their licensing mechanism, which is an interesting idea and an opportunity. But then looking kind of in Midwest also, some communities are, I'd say like Bloomington, Indiana is, I think, really doing amazing work. It's similar in that, it's similar size. It's a little bit bigger than La Crosse, but it's also a strong academic environment. The university there, just like La Crosse has great educational institutions right there in the city that are significant participants. Their state level legislative environment is very challenging. I'd say more so than maybe any other state in the Midwest, or certainly up there with any other state. And they are really working hard to kind of navigate around the obstacles that they have and focus on what they can do. They've put in actually a tax specific to the climate action plan. So they're doing some really interesting things that are advancing sustainability broadly and climate action. So I'm excited to see what they're doing. And I think they would be a great peer, actually, I think, for the cities to talk to each other.
Great. Well, Ted, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. Folks, if you stay on just for a second, there's going to be a survey that pops up here on your screen just to give us some feedback as to how this session went. And so if you could take a couple of seconds here to answer these 4 questions. And as you're doing that, I'd like to just thank you so much to Ted for taking time out of his day. And I'd also like to just remind people that free programming from the Sustainability Institute is really possible because we have members that are part of this organization. And so we can't do this without folks like our members who are able to pay for a little bit for a membership. And I want to, in particular, thank Wade Hackbarth, Glenn Jenkins, Jacob Siamas, Raj Schnick, Dorothy Leonard, Lynn and Todd Huffman, and Lee Rosh as some of our biggest supporters. If you would like to become a member of the Sustainability Institute, if you like what we're doing, if you agree with our vision of bringing a more positive view of sustainability to our area, please do visit our website, sustaininstitute.com, and consider becoming a member. It's really easy to do so. At the top of our page, you'll see a big green button that says become a member. Click on that and choose an option that feels comfortable to you and your level of financial support, and go at it. So we would love to have you as members. And finally, again, just thanks for attending. Join us for our next sustainability chat. It's going to be on March 17th, where we're joined by Dr. Erin Meslowski. She is a doctor at Gunderson, and she works on the idea of personal resilience, especially in challenging times. So, we can talk about climate resilience, we can talk about environmental resilience. There's also a level of personal resilience that plays into sustainability. And she's been doing some really cool work with folks at Gunderson around building personal resilience around challenging times. So again, everybody, thank you so much for joining. If you want to see a review this sustainability chat, it'll be up on our website at sustaininstitute.com in the next couple of days. So we would invite you to check that out, and hopefully we'll see you next month for our next sustainability chat. Thanks, everyone.